Hey, I want to show you an easy way to add client-side validation to a form while using the same schema that's used in the server-side validation and also abiding by the progressive enhancement strategy. I have here a simple contact form that's set up with server-side validation already. It has two fields, name and phone number. This form's using a server action to handle submission. Within its props, I've assigned a variable called action to its action attribute. This action variable comes from useFormState, which takes in another action called addContact. We'll take a closer look at that in just a moment. Before that, useFormState is a hook that's designed in a specific way to provide us with an action to use in our form, but internally it will call the action that you give it. This means that if the internal action returns something, the hook can collect that data and provide it to us via this server state variable that it's returning. I mentioned earlier that we'll be using a shared schema. This is the schema that I'll be using. It's made with Zod and simply expects a structure with a name property that needs to be a minimum of 1 or a maximum of 200 characters. Then a phone number property that needs to be a minimum of 10 and a maximum of 11 characters. Let's take a look at the addContact action and see what it does. As an action bound to a form, one of its parameters will be this form data. Then right at the top, this current values object is constructed by pulling the values out of the data parameter itself. Then we have a check here to see if the current values match the schema. If the check is unsuccessful, the action is going to return an object containing the current values, a property called field errors, which contains this nicely formatted object from Zod, and then this isSubmitted property, which is set to true. If the check was successful, the action will redirect the user to a new path, but of course in the real world you might want to persist the values or do something with them before redirecting. Now, back in the form, let's have a look at how the UI of the form uses the data from the action when the values of the form are invalid. I have these text field components. In your case, you can use whatever you want to mark up your form, but this text field component is just rendering a standard label, HTML input under the hood, but it also takes these errors and touch properties. The errors prop takes in just simply a list of errors if there are any for the field. Zod's nicely formatted error object works perfectly here, and then the touch property is used to manage the display of the errors. So it's designed to suppress error messages passed in via that errors prop until the value of the touch property is true. In our case, touch is only true when isSubmitted is true. The last thing to point out is these default value props. They're set with the values passed back from the action so that when a submission happens, the value reflects the value it had at the time of submission for any attempt. Of course, on initial load, by default, the default value is just undefined, or you could use another value if you're pre-populating a form. Okay, let's give this form a try. First, I'll click submit with an empty invalid form. And as you would expect, it shows an error message for each field. Now, if I type a valid name and try again, this time the error message for the name goes away and the one for phone number remains. So let's try with everything now valid by adding a phone number. And now it submits. As you know, we're using server actions, so everything that we've seen will behave exactly the same way with JavaScript disabled. So I'll save you the time and won't repeat that process. Instead, we'll move on to enhance the form with client-side validation. Users shouldn't have to wait until they hit submit to find out that they've made an error. We should be giving them feedback about an invalid value as soon as possible. Ideally, this is just after they click or tab away from a field, having provided an invalid value. There's lots of ways to implement client-side validation, but We have to be careful not to introduce a whole new code path to build and maintain, or break the site's operability when JavaScript is off. Ideally, it would be good to have the exact same schema used in the server action on the client side as well. So here's where I introduce a hook called use-vali. It's a hook that provides just a few handlers that you need to bind to your form. When JavaScript is on, it's going to keep track of your values and validate them, enriching the server state with your current values, any errors that it's found. It's also going to keep track of any fields that you've interacted with, so it knows the touch state of your form. If JavaScript is off, none of that is going to work, but it's not going to get in the way of the server action submission that we've just looked at. So let's do an npm install of use-vali. Okay, and then with vali installed, I'm just going to call it after useForm state. It takes two things. It takes the schema and then your current state. In the return, it's going to give us two things, an object called state and then the vali handlers. I'm just going to spread these handlers into the form to hook it up with vali. This state object is essentially an enriched copy of the server state. So I'll update the rest of the component to use this state object instead of server state. The last thing we need to do is update the touch property of all the fields. As well as touch being true when isSubmitted is true, we want to also say that the field is touched after you've interacted with it by using this enriched state object. Okay, it's time to give this a try. I'll click into the phone number field and type a value. A phone number isn't valid unless it's 10 or 11 characters. So if I click away now, I will see an error, which is really good. Let's click back in and make the field valid. And as soon as the value becomes valid, the error message disappears. This is brilliant. We're getting instant feedback from our form. I just want to show you that the server-side validation is still there as a fallback. I won't touch the name field and just click submit. And of course the error message appears, but the phone number is all good. Right, let's turn JavaScript off and see what this looks like. With JavaScript off, I'm going to do exactly the same as I did before. I'm going to type a value into the phone number field, but not enough for it to be valid. When I click away, no error message appears. So with JavaScript off, we can't expect to see that runtime interactivity. But if I try to submit, we should get the errors for both fields. So it's all good. As you can see, by simply dropping in a hook, we've enhanced the experience for users with JavaScript on. Most people will experience this enhancement. For those without, crucially, we haven't impacted their experience. So we've stuck by the progressive enhancement strategy, which is all about enhancing the experience without breaking the experience for others. We've also benefited by sharing a single schema across client and server-side validation, so the validation is in sync and easy to manage. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to show you. If you like the look of Vali, please check it out on npm. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or you want to give me any feedback, please do. Use the comment box below. That's it. See ya.